Hi, my name is June Park and this is AP Macroeconomics. Yes, the first question on our list is a simple solving question. So the question asks, the table shows macroeconomic data for the nation of Hamsterville during 2018. Move directly to the question itself. What is the nominal GDP in Hamsterville in 2018? The only thing you'll have to know in this question is the actual formula for GDP. So the formula for GDP is C plus I plus G plus XM. So it's consumption, investment, government spending, and exports minus imports. So the categories are given and they're a little confusing usually. However, it's very easy if you know the formula and just plug the numbers in. So we have consumption spending on goods produced internationally, all consumption spending produced domestically or internationally, and gross private investment. The latter three are a little simple: government spending, goods produced in Hamsterville and sold in other countries, and capital depreciation. Let's calculate and plug this in. So for consumption, you would have internationally 75, 400, so 475. Investment is ultimately what people actually spend producing domestically. So that is 200. Okay, so the only thing you need to know in this question is the formula for nominal GDP. We'll talk about real GDP later on, but nominal GDP is calculated as consumption plus investment plus government spending plus export minus imports is the formula for GDP. And once you know that everything falls into place, gross private investment would go here, would go over here. All consumption spending produced domestically or internationally, that's 400. Over here. Consumption spending on goods produced internationally, so we'll just highlight internationally over here and keep that there. Government spending on goods and services, so government spending is another here. Goods produced in Hamsterville and sold in other countries. So please underline that here, and capital depreciation is something that you shouldn't really concern about when calculating GDP. So the only trick here would be these two. So how would you calculate this? Consumption spending on goods produced internationally, so those are imports. Goods produced in Hamsterville and sold in other countries, those are exports. So basically it's 25 minus 75 is all you need to do. So what is 25 minus 75? That's a negative 50. And once you're done with that, you add all these numbers up to get the final answer, which is obviously 400, 200, 600, 700 minus 50 is 650 million is the answer. I think a lot of students either get these two parts, so what are imports and exports, wrong, or don't know the formula for GDP. That's number two. But finally, I think a lot of students mistake nominal GDP for real GDP and they get confused. So please, it's a very simple question. Add the numbers, know the formula, plug them in, and that's all you need to do for this question. Let's move on to the next question. All right, so the final question for AP Macroeconomics today is about intermediary goods, usually found in unit number 5. The question states, why does the measurement of a country's GDP not include the value of all intermediate goods used in the production of finished goods? So the term intermediate goods, refers to goods or services that are used to produce other goods or services. So think about in the secondary sector, when you're making finished products for the tertiary sector, you have a lot of machines and capital that goes in. So those are intermediary goods. The question is, in the formula of GDP, which is C, I, G, and then X minus M, why does it not include intermediary goods? And I think rather than just thinking a lot about the formula for GDP, it's best to just look at the option choices because this is a process of elimination. A, because the value of intermediate goods would be undercounted and GDP would appear much smaller than it actually is. So please keep in mind of the word undercounted because it's going to reflect off other answer choices. But let's just keep it at there. Because the value of intermediate goods would be overcounted and GDP would appear much larger than it actually is. So these are two opposing ideas. Because intermediate goods aren't always produced within a country's borders, so we cannot count them towards the country's GDP. Not true if the intermediate goods are actually, if the factories are within your countries, this would be within the country's borders. If they're outside, they wouldn't even count at the end of the day. D, because the value of intermediate goods would be overcounted and GDP would appear much larger than it actually is, overcounted. Because the value of finished goods does not include the value of intermediate goods, you won't even have to think about that. So I think the option choices are either between overcounted and undercounted. But if you think of the nature of intermediate goods itself, if you look at the actual chapter, those are absolutely goods and services that are used within the production. So the final iPad or the final phone that you actually produce would have the value of the intermediate goods within them. So the problem is always with overcounting. And I think that's highlighted exceptionally in the book. So we're going to go either between B or D in this chapter, in this answer choice. The difference between B or D is its understanding of intermediate goods itself. So if you look over here, would be overcounted, it's the same. The only difference between that would be the GDP would appear much larger than it actually is, would appear much smaller than it actually is. If it's overcounted, it will appear much larger than it actually is. So ultimately, if you look at the answer choices, please note that in a non-source type of questions, there are always going to be contradictory options and your job is to find them out. For example, C and E were really never option choices because they're non-factual. The only options are between A, B, and D. Your job is to find out where they differ. So undercounted would be A, overcounted would be B. And your job would be to understand how overcounting affects GDP. So much smaller, much larger than it actually is. Very simple question if you think about it. Sometimes students, they count the number of contradictions and they immediately choose between B or D because they think those are two options. So they must be correct in one. Please note that in some cases, answer C or E, the individual questions might be correct. So while it's a good strategy to find out contradicting option choices, always please go back to reading the questions before you choose the final answer. So for this, it'll be number D, and I'm open to any questions there are. And that is AP Macroeconomics. Thank you.